Welcome back to Mac Stories Unwind, the show that's all about the picks. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vidici. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. You know what? It's the Friday after Thanksgiving. We actually just recorded App Stories for next week also.
It's Black Friday.
Yeah, it's Black Friday. And I sent you some links because I know you're looking for some things, and I bet you already knew about the deal that I sent you. But I was sending Federico deals on Eros.
I did know about it.
Yeah, the Eero 6E, which Amazon has on discount right now. But that's something we talked about a little bit on App Stories, which we recorded earlier today. And part of the pre-show for that, for App Stories Plus subscribers, was me talking a little bit about some of my retro gaming stuff that I've been doing. But I have another piece of it that I saved for Mac Stories Unwind listeners, which is I downloaded earlier this week Atari 50. Which is...
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's not exactly a game. I'll explain. It's a collection of games and a documentary all kind of bundled into one. This is available on PS5, Xbox, Switch, and Steam. And I decided to get it on the PS5 because that's my biggest screen in the house. And I thought, since there's a documentary aspect of this, it might be best played on the TV as opposed to handheld or something. So I got it on the PS5. And this is celebrating the 50th anniversary of Atari, which was one of the obviously earliest video game makers in the world. And this particular title, Atari 50, was developed by Digital Eclipse, which you may recognize the name from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga collection, which they did earlier this year.
Yeah, I do, yes.
That was a remake of I guess it was almost like a classic re-release of a bunch of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games from the 90s. Never really my thing, the Ninja Turtles, but that was, from all the reviews I read, done very well. And I think they've done a fantastic job with Atari, because the thing about a lot of these games that are being celebrated here, and there are over 100 games in this collection, a lot of them come from the 70s and 80s. Some of them are arcade games. Some of them are Atari 2600 games, and the Lynx and the Jaguar, and all these old systems from back in the day. And not all of them play so well on modern controllers. And so I think what makes this collection work really well is not just the games, but the history behind the games. And the way the Atari 50 collection is organized it's organized as a timeline. So you can dive right into the games if you want and just kind of like scroll through a list by platform and pick a game and start playing it. But I've really enjoyed going through this timeline, and you can just kind of use the thumbstick and go from year to year, to event to event. It's kind of done in a horizontal and vertical ways. So you start out navigating horizontally, and then there'll usually be a few things stacked on top of each other that you can scroll between with the thumbstick. And what's in here is a combination of text, which explains some of the history of Atari, as well as a lot of images, videos, which are primarily interviews with people who worked there in the early days. Yeah, as well as some historical footage. Like for instance, there's a theatrical trailer for Yar's Revenge that was done on television at some point. So it's very analog looking and pixelated. And I mean, there's a lot of really interesting tidbits throughout history here. And it all starts with a game that I think a lot of people probably have not heard of, but it's called Computer Space from 1971.
Computer Space?
Yes, Computer Space. Which when you watch one of the videos about it, there's some footage of it being played. This game is not one of the playable games, but there's a lot of asteroids in this. Like, you can see the heritage of what ultimately would become asteroids in this game, because the physics of the spaceships involved move very similar to little triangles in the original Asteroids game, which was kind of fun. And they tell the story of how one of the, years and years later, one of the people who worked on Computer Space in the 70s saw in the San Jose Mercury News that someone was trying to sell a computer space game. And they called the guy up. And they're like, do you have a computer space game? He's like, yeah, what color do you want? And it turned out this guy had like a dozen of these games in all different colors. And he also had the very first one that had ever been created and made and put into an arcade. And it tells the story of how that is and why this person had all of these, and they bought them from him and preserved that arcade history. But back in those days, it wasn't software running on chips the way we think of it today. It was all hardwired into the motherboards inside these arcade cabinets, and they're very, very simple games. But it goes through the whole history. There's Pong, and you can play Pong. I will say that playing Pong and moving the paddle with the D-pad is actually not very easy. I think Pong originally had a dial that you turned. And that's the thing with some of the classic arcade games in this series, is that a lot of arcade games use different control methods. Like, Centipede had a roller ball, and I think Tempest had a dial too. There's a lot of things like that don't really translate directly into a modern game controller. However, they are still playable, and it's kind of neat to kind of dive in and try them. And really anything you can think of is here, because there's, I think, something like 100 games plus 5 unlockable games. And among those are like 25 arcade games, 40 Atari 2600 games, all the way to the more current stuff. And, you'll find Centipede and Asteroids and Missile Command and Tempest, Yar's Revenge, and even the E.T. extraterrestrial game that was eventually ended up in, I think, a New Mexico landfill.
It ended up in
right?
a landfill. Yeah, it ended up in a landfill in New Mexico. I believe it was found just outside of Albuquerque, maybe. Like, it was literally...
think that's right. I remember.
It was like this urban myth of this landfill featuring cartridges for E.T. And it was always like this legend. But then I think a few years ago, they set out to prove whether it was actually true or not. And I believe, I want to say, the Microsoft funded the experiment, and they made like an Xbox branded documentary out of it. And they started digging in New Mexico, and they found them. They found like this truck that dumped like these thousands of cartridges for the E.T. game. So all of it was true.
Yeah, it was a big part of video game history, mainly because it was the first collapse of the video game economy. And E.T., I don't think the E.T. game was considered very good at the time. But as a piece of history, it's kind of interesting. It has a good story, and you can actually try it out here. So you'll find like adventure. I don't know. There are a bunch of other, obviously there's over 100 games. There's a lot here to dig into. But for me, what's neat about it is the way they've interspersed the games, which some of them, as I said, aren't super playable on their own. And you would, I think, if you went like from just game to game to game, you might abandon it pretty quickly because, it'd be a little frustrating. But when you have it interspersed with these bits of history, this text where you can learn a little bit and then watch these videos, these interviews with some of the early developers of these games, it's really cool. And one of the things that I found really interesting was there was a review in IGN of this, and it's gotten really rave reviews kind of across the board from all sorts of websites, that the reviewer mentioned that there's a screenshot in this collection of the code for a game called Combat, which was on the Atari 2600, and a single screenshot captures the entire code for the game, which is kind of remarkable when you think about it. I mean, and the size, the image itself, the screenshot is larger than the code was when it was saved back in the day. So that's kind of neat. I mean, these are very, very old games, real classics, a lot of them. And I think they've done a really nice job of picking the ones that are representative of these different eras and also putting them in context, which I think is the most important thing, especially when some of the games are so old that they maybe aren't, considered necessarily as fun as they may have or maybe were in the 70s or 80s, but by today's standards. So I recommend it. It's kind of a fun thing. It's one of those things where you can just kind of chill out and thumb through these different eras with the thumbstick on your PS5 or Switch or whatever, and watch some good videos and try out a few of the games.
Yeah, I especially love all the curation that went into it, and I mean it's no surprise
Yeah.
given the what the developers are known for, but the interviews and the timelines and the history, like all the details that you get, like that speaks to the incredible preservation efforts that that go into collections like this. And I mean, you mentioned the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like the Kawabanga collection. Like that's also an
Yep.
excellent one. I saw a few tweets about the Atari collection. I think I need to check this out either on the Steam Deck or on the Nintendo Switch. This sounds really lovely.
Yeah, if you're into video game history and preservation, Digital Eclipse is a developer to keep an eye on because they also did a Mega Man collection a while back too, which I have not checked out. But now that I've seen what a great job they did with Atari 50, I'm really curious to see, to maybe check out some of those older titles and also see what they're going to do next. I know there was some speculation at some point that there might be something similar to Atari, but with Sega at some point, which would be really neat.
All right, I thought I would have a different kind of media pick this week, John. I want to talk briefly about the different ways I use to discover music, both old and new music. Just a couple of tools that I use that I want to recommend, and there's a couple of apps and a couple of websites. So obviously, I've always been the kind of person that enjoys listening to new music. It's totally fair if you are the kind of person who prefers to listen to whatever you used to listen to in high school, for example. You don't care about discovery, you don't care about, finding new music to learn about from new and emerging artists, and that's totally fine. But I've always been the kind of person who finds pleasure in listening to something I never heard of before. So obviously, I think there's a couple of websites I wanna give a shout out to. I mentioned this before on Mac Stories and here. Obviously, there's Pitchfork. Pitchfork.com has been well known in the music industry for the past, I want to say, 2 decades. It's now a Condé Nast publication. It has been for a long time, really. And Pitchfork has found its place in the music press by having this very opinionated, sometimes long form written reviews of albums with a very particular voting scale. With the Pitchfork as most
Right.
Pitchfork has the Pitchfork review, which is an entity of its own. The reviews are always, sometimes I strongly disagree with the Pitchfork review, but that's the thing. You can disagree with the review, but you can still respect the point of view of the reviewer, which is not something that can be easily said about other music websites. But also the thing about Pitchfork, they're also very good with covering news and like new announcements. They have playlists on Spotify and Apple Music with their weekly and annual recommendations. So through the course of the year and at the end of the year, you can sign up, you can find one of these Pitchfork made playlists, and you can easily sift through all of for example, the songs that Pitchfork thinks are the best new songs of the year. And that's always an excellent way to find new music, because from there, maybe you hear something you like and you open the full artist page and maybe you start listening to the full album. So definitely check out, if you're into music, you probably know Pitchfork. I don't think I need to give any other recommendation here, but do check out the long form essays that they do. In addition to the reviews, they have editorial pieces and they do roundups. And now it's that time of the year. It's November, approaching the holiday season. It's that time of year where best of collections come out. Pitchfork will have playlists for sure. Another website that I want to mention, of course, from a dear friend, Jason Tate, that's Chorus FM. Now, Chorus FM used to be known, if you are my age, or maybe even a little older than me, if you are in your mid-30s, boy, does that sound scary to say as a thing. You may remember this music blog and forum, the forum boards of absolutepunk.net. It used to be, I want to say it already existed in the late 90s, but let's say the early 2000s. I remember being in high school and reading Absolute Punk for the music news and on the forum boards. That was really in the heyday of the emo scene, and punk rock, of course. So there was, the early 2000s Blink-182, the debut of Paramore, My Chemical Romance were all the rage, and like it was an absolute pleasure and blast to spend time on Absolute Punk. Now, Absolute Punk was rebranded to Chorus.fm a few years ago, and it's not just Jason anymore. There's a team of writers. There's still the forums, but I really like sort of the more grown-up approach that maybe Jason has taken with the website, where it doesn't just cover emo and punk rock anymore. Jason has a very diverse music diet, if you will. Like Jason, I like Jason's writing. Really does. Because he spans, he can listen to pop and anything that you may hear from, I don't know, a new single from The Weeknd, for example, or something. But then, he also covers, classic emo, and, Blink-182 are coming back. You can find the review and the announcement on Chorus FM. And, the thing I love about Chorus FM is especially the weekly newsletter, or almost weekly, I guess, the liner notes newsletter that Jason puts together every Saturday, I want to say, or Friday evening. And it's an excellent recap, because what I love about it is there's a mix of here's what Jason has been up to, and here's also a recap of what it's been listening to. And the guy listens to a lot of music, and it's always a great way to find something that I didn't know about. Also because Jason, listens to well-known artists as well as the indie, smaller bands and emerging artists. It's always a great way to discover new music. And in a funny twist of fate that, when I was younger, I could have never imagined. Now I know Jason personally, like we never met in real life, but I know the guy. We've exchanged messages privately multiple times over the past, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. And he helped me out with a few projects. When I was setting up a Raspberry Pi as a music player, for example. I had Jason test out MusicBot when I was working on the shortcut. It's always it's incredible to me that someone that I used to read when I was in high school, and he was already doing, I think Jason is a few years older than me. He was already writing at the time, and I was a kid. And now that I'm writing for a living, but about technology, there's still Jason writing about music. So it's all kind of been a constant in my life.
Right.
And I appreciate that. So Chorus FM, excellent music website. Then I want to mention a couple of apps. Music Harbor. I mean, obviously we covered this before on Mac Stories. Incredible music app by Marcos Tanaka to discover new music. You sync up with your Spotify account or your Apple Music library, and it finds the artists that are already in your library, and then it tells you when those artists have new music on Fridays. Usually, it's the missing new release tracker from Apple Music. Like this is exactly the kind of feature that Apple should copy. They are not copying it. And so you can just use Music Harbor for this. And from there, there's a bunch of options, but, check out the review on Mac Stories that details all the different things you can do with Music Harbor. But every Friday morning, that's what I do. I open Music Harbor and I scroll through to see, oh, yeah, I see Coldplay have a new song, or Death Cab for Cutie have a new album, and so forth. And lastly, also by Marcos Tanaka, same developer. The guy knows his music stuff, obviously. Music Smart. Music Smart is an incredible tool to find all kinds of metadata from an album or song you're listening to. And the metadata is important because from there you can start making connections. So, for example, if you're listening to Jimmy Eat World and you want to know, hey, who's playing the saxophone in the in this track of this song? Like, what's the saxophone in the back doing? And from there you can find the name of the performer that played the saxophone on that Jimmy Eat World song, and you can tap on their name in Music Smart, and you can see the other songs that the performer worked on. So Music Smart is an incredible tool to make connections if you care about the art of music, the performers, the engineers, the music labels, and from there it's this different type of discovery where you start from a song or an album and you find other songs based on the people that worked on a particular track or record. So Music Smart, fantastic utility if you are really into music and you want to find out more about the music you like by checking out the people who worked on it.
Very cool. Yeah, I use all those tools and visit those websites myself. That's those are great picks. All right, Federico. I think that'll keep people busy for the rest of this holiday weekend in the United States. I guess we'll be back in another week, and you can find us over at macstories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you later, Federico.
Ciao, John.